So today, here are the supplies: a thermometer, a glass jar with a lid, steel wool, and distilled white vinegar. I will start this experiment off by first measuring the temperature of the jar itself. That way I can see how much temperature changes. I will seal the jar with the lid very well and very tight. And I will leave that there for 5 minutes to get an accurate reading of the inside of the jar to make sure that the temperature is what it normally is. And this way I can get an accurate change in temperature through the exothermic reaction that will take place later on in this experiment. I'm starting a timer for 5 minutes now. Now that we have an accurate reading of the average initial temperature in the jar, I will be opening up the steel wool, and this will be the first trial out of 3 so that I can ensure just a little bit more that I get an average change in temperature that will occur in this reaction. I will grab a glass bowl so that you guys can see what's going on while I soak the steel wool in the vinegar. While I had listed in supplies that you would need 4 cups of white vinegar, it really just varies on how big your bowl is. You really just need to make sure that you have enough vinegar to cover the steel wool completely so that it can soak completely in the steel wool. Now I am about to pour. As you can see, I kind of just really poured until the steel wool was completely covered and would stay completely covered. So now I have waited 1 minute for the wool to completely soak in the white vinegar, and now I am about to drain as much of the vinegar as I can out of it so that it'll ensure less of a cleanup after I put it in the jar. Ignore me dropping it back in there. Then I'm grabbing my thermometer and wrapping the steel wool around the thermometer and kind of closing it and putting it into the jar. That way, it'll be as close to the source as possible, closing it, and then now I will wait 5 minutes to get an accurate reading of the temperature in the jar. So now that it's been 5 minutes, I'm opening up the jar so that I can try and get a reading of how the temperature in the jar at that point. I'm checking the thermometer as close to the source as I can to make sure it's accurate. And the temperature for the first run was 85.8. As you can see, the steel wool is a different color now. That's because of the oxidation that has taken place. Steel with steel wool. Usually the vinegar not only removes the protective covering on the steel wool, but once it's off, the acidity, acids, and oxidation, which is the rust of the iron in the steel, which is why it's a different color, is starting to rust. The thermal energy given off during this chemical reaction is what causes the temperature to go up. And in the rusting of iron, 4 atoms of solid iron are reacting with 3 molecules of oxygen gas to form 2 molecules of solid rust, or in this case, iron oxide, which is, as you can see, well, steel oxide, which is what you can see is basically what happens in this experiment. Now, as you can see me, I am cleaning out my jar to ensure that there's no heat extra in there. I'm making sure that it's a clean experiment and that this does not change the results. Also, you will see me, I really just ran water through it, cleaned it out well, thoroughly made sure it was still dry so I can do the next experiment. Now I am repeating the process with the second piece of steel wool. As you can see, here's me draining the steel again and about to wrap it around again, and I'm struggling a little bit, please ignore me, and can put it in the jar for another 5 minutes to ensure an accurate and consistent reading of the change in temperature. Now that it's been 5 minutes, I am about to take the second reading of the temperature of the steel wool. For the second reading, the temperature increased again, which is also why I wanted to take 3 experiments to try and get an average. This time, the temperature was 86.2 when I took it out. Now, for this experiment, I cannot really say why each time was different. It could very well be how much I um, poured it out and how much I squeezed out. But as I was showing the thermometer, I was showing how quickly it the temperature starts to decrease. There was no immediate heat that I could feel. I was sticking my hand in the jar each time, and I was kind of feeling the steel wool to see if there's any heat, to see if I could actually feel the heat myself, but there wasn't any. But as you can see, there also was. It was very important for me to take as quick of a reading as I can of the thermometer while the steel wool was around it, because as soon as it's removed, it immediately starts going down because it's being cooled by the outside air. Now I am cleaning it again to make sure that I have an accurate reading, which is very important to clean your materials throughout, especially if you're using the same jar as I was instead of 3 separate jars. This is very pertinent to the experiment that I clean this one jar out very well to ensure that the readings are accurate. So now this is a minute after that I am squeezing out the third and final piece of steel wool. As you can see, I started to try and squeeze it a little bit more to see if that would have an effect on it, if there were more white vinegar in it, or if that would determine how fast it rusted or how fast it exuded heat. Now I'm sticking it back into the jar, and we will be leaving it in there for 5 minutes to ensure consistency in this experiment. So now it's 5 minutes after, and I will be opening up the jar and taking a quick reading of the temperature. For this last experiment, the temperature for this reading's temperature was 86.8, and this time I could feel a little heat coming off of the wool when I pulled it out. I think this may have maybe the since I squeezed this one more, the vinegar, there was less vinegar in there, and maybe that allowed it to rust faster and have more of an exothermic reaction. Um, as you can see, I'm taking it out now. I've been trying to get a quick reading because that was very important. And next, I will be trying to show you guys how much it rusted. Here's me feeling for the heat that I